The glass panels of the Meridian Tower caught the afternoon sun like a mirror, throwing golden light across the lobby where my father stood, shaking hands with city councilors and real estate developers, every one of them congratulating him on the most ambitious project the Kellerman Group had undertaken in 20 years. I watched from behind the reception desk, a clipboard pressed to my chest, a lanyard around my neck that read, Site Coordinator, Arcline Design Studio. The name on the lanyard was Nathan Voss. That part was real. Everything else about who they thought I was standing in that lobby was not. My father's voice carried the way it always had, large and certain, filling whatever room it entered. 18 months of work, he was telling the deputy mayor, and every detail exactly as the Kellerman name demands. He spread his hands open, like a man presenting a gift he had wrapped himself. Behind him, the atrium rose 6 stories, the curved interior walls following a geometric pattern of interlocking arches that the architecture press had already called the most original structural concept in Canadian commercial building in a decade. My father had no idea that his eldest son had designed every one of those arches. My name is Nathan Kellerman. I was declared, not dead exactly, but something close to it in the way that mattered most to people like my family. I was declared a failure, a disgrace, and eventually, in all practical terms, erased. The day I left the family home in Vancouver at 26, my father told my younger brother Derek that I had gone to find myself, which was his way of saying I had chosen poverty over responsibility and would be back within a year, humbled and corrected. When I did not come back, he stopped mentioning me at all. By the time Derek got married 3 years later, my chair at the table was simply gone. I had been standing inside the building my father's company commissioned without ever knowing I built it, and I had been doing so for the last 45 minutes. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that lobby makes sense without it. I grew up inside the Kellerman Group the way some kids grow up inside a religion. My grandfather Harold started the company in Edmonton in the 1970s, building strip malls and low-rise condominiums. My father Raymond expanded it into one of the most recognized commercial real estate development firms in Western Canada. By the time I was in university studying architecture at UBC, the Kellerman name was on office towers in Calgary and Vancouver, and a mixed-use waterfront development in Victoria that had won a provincial design award. The award was framed in the boardroom. I had stared at it my entire childhood, knowing that someday I would be the one designing the buildings that earned those frames. What I did not understand then was that my father had a different role in mind for me. Not architect, not designer. He wanted me in acquisitions, then contracts, then eventually operations. He was not interested in the creative side of the business. That was what you hired other people for. The Kellerman men, in his view, were builders in the financial sense, not the physical one. They negotiated, they leveraged, they controlled. I tried it his way for 2 years after I graduated. I sat in boardrooms and reviewed site assessments, and learned more about commercial lending structures than I ever wanted to know. I was good at it in the technical sense, but I was quietly suffocating. Every weekend I was filling sketchbooks with structural concepts I had no outlet to pursue. Every time a new project came through the office, I found myself pulling the architect's drawings out of the proposal folders and reading them the way other people read novels, trying to understand the decisions behind every line. When I finally told my father that I wanted to transition into the design side of the business, to bring the architecture work in-house, and build a division that could give the Kellerman Group creative ownership of its projects instead of outsourcing it, he looked at me the way he looked at contractors who came in over budget, disappointed but not surprised. "We're not an architecture firm," he said. "We're a development company. You want to draw pictures? Go work for someone else." I told him that the industry was moving toward integrated design and build models, that having in-house architectural capacity would give us a competitive edge, that I had been researching firms across North America doing exactly this, and the results were measurable. He told me that Harold Kellerman had built this company without needing a son to tell him how the industry worked, and that I should think carefully about whether I wanted to keep having this conversation. We had it 3 more times over the following 6 months. The last time, I put a full proposal on his desk. 40 pages. Market analysis. Projected cost savings. Case studies from comparable firms in Toronto and Seattle. He left it sitting there for 2 weeks without reading it. I know he didn't read it because when I finally asked him about it, he cited a detail from page 3 that was actually on page 12 and got it wrong. That was the moment I understood. This was not a business disagreement. This was about authority. My father had built something he was proud of, and he needed the people inside it to confirm that pride by following the shape he had already decided everything should take. My proposal was not a threat to the company. It was a threat to his certainty that he knew best. I resigned on a Tuesday in March. I was 26 years old, and I had $17,000 in savings and a portfolio of work I had done on my own time that no one in my family had ever seen. My father's response was quiet and measured in the way that was somehow worse than shouting. He told me that when the architecture market humbled me, I should not expect the Kellerman name to cushion the landing. My mother said nothing. She stood at the kitchen counter with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and looked at the window like I was already gone. My younger brother, Derek, who was 23 and had just joined the company, came to find me that evening while I was packing a bag. "Dad says you're being reckless," he told me. "I know. Are you?" I thought about it. "Probably," I said. "But I'd rather be reckless doing something real than careful doing something hollow." Derek didn't have an answer for that. He helped me carry 2 boxes to my car. And that was the last real conversation we had for 8 years. I moved to Toronto. I spent the first year doing contract drafting work for a mid-size firm, the kind of work where you translate other people's visions into technically compliant drawings and never see a building go up that you actually thought about. I was broke and occasionally miserable and absolutely certain I had made the right decision. I started entering design competitions in my spare time, submitting under a studio name Arcline Design because I didn't want my family name to be the reason anything I submitted got noticed or ignored. I wanted to know if my work could stand on its own. The third competition I entered was a municipal library redesign in Hamilton. I didn't win, but I received an honorable mention and a phone call from a partner at a Toronto firm who had been on the jury and wanted to meet. That conversation led to a contract, which led to a full-time offer, which I declined because by then I had decided that Arcline was going to be a real studio or nothing at all. I took the contract money, added it to what I had managed to save, and registered Arcline Design Studio as a legal entity. I was 29 years old and I had one client, a budget I could carry in my head without a spreadsheet, and absolutely no safety net. What I had was the ability to think structurally in a way that turned out to be genuinely unusual. I could look at a site the way it caught light at different times of year, the way pedestrian movement would flow around and through it, the relationship between its footprint and the street grid, and I could see a building that belonged there rather than one that had simply been placed there. That sounds like the kind of thing every architect claims, but what made Arcline different was that I could also price it. Those 2 years in acquisitions and contracts had given me a financial literacy that most designers my age didn't have. I understood what things cost. I understood why certain design choices that looked beautiful on paper became liabilities during construction. I could have the conversation with a developer that most architects either couldn't have or refused to have, the honest conversation about what was achievable and what was indulgence, and I could have it without giving up the things that actually made a building worth building. Arcline grew slowly and then quickly, the way these things tend to work. By the time I was 32, I had 4 full-time employees and a string of completed projects that had started appearing in trade publications. By 35, we had won 2 significant competitions and completed a mixed-use development in Waterloo that won a Governor General's Medal in Architecture. I was living in a condo I owned in the Distillery District in Toronto. I had not spoken to my father in 9 years. I had exchanged a handful of careful emails with my mother on birthdays. Derek had sent me a brief message when he got married, and I had sent back a brief congratulation, and that was where we left things. I did not follow the Kellerman Group obsessively, but I kept a loose eye on it, not out of bitterness, or not only that. My father's company operated in the same industry I did, and there were practical reasons to know where they were building and what they were doing. I knew they had expanded into Ontario in the past few years. I knew they had run into some difficulties on a mixed-use project in Mississauga that went over budget and over time. I knew they were trying to establish a foothold in the Toronto commercial market, where the Kellerman name carried less weight than it did in the West, and where they were competing against firms with longer relationships and deeper local networks. What I did not know, until the proposal came through to Arcline in the ordinary way through our new business pipeline, was that the Kellerman Group had shortlisted us for a flagship commercial tower in downtown Toronto. The proposal had been managed through a procurement consultant they had hired, a firm that ran blind competitive processes for commercial clients who wanted to evaluate architectural talent without the relationships and biases that came with direct approaches. The process was designed specifically to prevent the kind of nepotism and cronyism that ran through the development industry like groundwater. Our submission was evaluated anonymously. We were shortlisted anonymously. The initial design brief was delivered to us, with the client identified only as a Western Canadian developer seeking Toronto market entry. My studio director, a woman named Priya, who had been with Arcline for 6 years and was the only person there who knew my full history, flagged the project as a potential conflict before we submitted. "You should know this is a Kellerman project," she told me, setting the procurement documents on my desk with the client disclosure page on top. I sat with it for a full day. I thought about whether I had any obligation to disclose my connection to the client given the anonymous process. I consulted a lawyer who specialized in professional practice, who told me that since I had no ongoing relationship with the Kellerman Group and no access to any proprietary or confidential information about them, and since the process was explicitly designed to evaluate firms on merit alone, there was no conflict requiring disclosure at the shortlist stage. If we were selected for final presentation, we would meet the client directly, and at that point full transparency would be both appropriate and necessary. I made one decision that I am still not entirely sure how to characterize. I did not withdraw. I told myself it was because the project was genuinely excellent. A 50-story mixed-use tower on a prominent downtown site with a brief that gave real creative latitude, and that withdrawing on the basis of a start connection the process was designed to look past would be its own kind of dishonesty. The work deserved to be judged as work. The honest version is that there was also a part of me that had been waiting, without ever quite naming it, for exactly this kind of moment. Not for revenge in the way people usually mean it, for something more specific than that. For the chance to let my work answer the question my father had settled in his own mind years ago. Arcline won the design contract for the Meridian Tower 8 months before the day I stood in that lobby watching my father shake hands with city councilors. The selection process had been rigorous, and the decision had been unanimous among the evaluation panel. We had been brought into direct meetings with the Kellerman Group's project team in month 2 of the design development phase, and by then the process protocols had shifted and the identity of all parties was disclosed. I had met with Derek twice in those meetings. He had not recognized me. I had changed enough in 8 years longer hair, a beard I had grown in my early 30s, the particular way that time reshapes a face when seen only in photographs, and he had never been especially attuned to looking closely at people. I was Nathan Voss from Arcline Design Studio, site coordinator. He had shaken my hand twice and read my name off a lanyard. I had considered revealing myself, several times, in fact. During the design development phase, when we were presenting the atrium concept to the full project team, and I watched my father's face move through something that I can only describe as genuine wonder at the structural approach, I had come very close. There was a version of this where I walked up to him after the presentation, extended my hand, and said, "I'm Nathan Kellerman. You told me to go find someone else to draw pictures for. I thought you should know how that turned out, but I didn't, because the project wasn't finished, and the project mattered more than the moment. Whatever I felt about my family, I had 50 stories of building and the better part of a year of construction still ahead of me, and the people who lived and worked in that building eventually were not part of any story between me and my father. They deserved the building to be finished right. I stayed Nathan Voss until opening day. The grand opening ceremony for the Meridian Tower was held on a Thursday in October, a bright, cold afternoon with the kind of sky Toronto gets in the fall that makes the glass on new buildings look like it's been lit from inside. There was a short outdoor program, remarks from the mayor's office, a ribbon cutting in front of the main entrance with my father and the deputy mayor holding oversized ceremonial scissors. I stood at the back of the gathered crowd and watched and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was calm. Inside, the atrium filled the way I had designed it to fill the light, moving across the curved interior walls, in the pattern the geometry was built to create, the acoustic quality absorbing the crowd noise into something warm rather than overwhelming. The way the sightlines from the lobby to the upper floors gave you the feeling of space without exposure. It worked. 8 years of building a studio that could do work like this, and it worked the way I had hoped it would work when I first sketched the concept in my apartment at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. My father was at the center of the room, and he was happy. That was the only word for it. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was looking up at the atrium, the way I had seen him look at buildings he was proud of when I was young, with that particular expression of proprietorial satisfaction that was the closest he ever came to joy. He had not built this building. He had paid for it and managed the development risk and put his name on the press release. But watching him look at it, I understood something I had not understood fully before. He loved the buildings, not the way I loved them, not from the inside, but in his own way. He loved them. That was why he had expanded the company. That was why the award in the boardroom was framed. He wanted to make things that lasted. He just couldn't see that I had inherited that from him. The reception moved inside after the ribbon cutting. Catered, well attended, the kind of event where business cards changed hands every few minutes, and everyone was performing a version of themselves designed for the room. I found Priya near the windows on the mezzanine level, and we stood together for a few minutes without saying anything, looking out at the city below. "You should do it today," she said. "I know. You're not going to get a cleaner moment than this. I know that too." She left me to it. I finished my drink and took the elevator down to the lobby level and walked across the atrium floor to where my father was standing, with a small group that included Derek and two people I didn't recognize, probably Toronto business contacts. I waited at the edge of the group until there was a natural pause in the conversation, and then I stepped forward. "Mr. Kellerman," I said. "My name is Nathan Voss. I'm the site coordinator for Arcline Design Studio." My father turned and extended his hand with the reflexive warmth of someone who had been doing public relations for 30 years. "Of course. Excellent work today. The whole Arcline team has been tremendous. Thank you. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you have a few minutes." Something in my voice or my face must have registered, because Derek looked up from his phone at that moment and went slightly still. He was studying me with the focused attention of someone trying to locate a memory they can't quite reach. My father gestured for me to walk with him toward a quieter section of the lobby near the far windows. I followed him. When we were clear of the group, I stopped and turned to face him. "You should probably know," I said, "that Nathan Voss is a name I use professionally. I took it when I started Arcline, because I wanted the work to be evaluated on its own terms. My legal name is Nathan Kellerman." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, I watched my father's face move through a sequence of expressions that I will remember for the rest of my life. Confusion first, then a sharp, focused attention, then something that looked almost like the early stages of grief. "Nathan," he said. "Not a question. A statement." "Yes." He looked at the atrium, the one we were standing inside, the one I had designed. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked back at me. "You designed this building. Arcline designed this building. I founded Arcline in 2017. I've been the lead designer on every major project we've undertaken." He was quiet. For a man who had always had words ready and available, the silence was striking. "You were on the project team," he said slowly. "Those meetings. You were there." "I was there." Derek shook your hand. "Twice." Another silence. I had rehearsed this moment in versions for the better part of a year, and in most of those versions I had imagined a confrontation. My father's anger, meeting my composure, the old arguments finally resolved by evidence. What was actually happening was something quieter and in some ways harder to know what to do with. He looked less like a man being defeated and more like a man recalculating something fundamental. "The atrium," he said finally. "The arch structure. That was your idea." "Yes." The evaluation panel said it was the most technically and aesthetically sophisticated submission they reviewed. "I know," they told us. He rubbed the side of his jaw. It was a gesture I recognized from my childhood. The thing he did when he was thinking through a problem that hadn't resolved itself the way he expected. "Nathan," he said, and his voice had changed slightly. Something taken out of it that I had always associated with his authority. "I owe you an honest conversation." "Yes," I said. "You do. Not here." "No, not here." We agreed to meet for dinner 2 days later. Before I walked back across the atrium to find Priya, Derek intercepted me near the base of the stairs. He had figured it out. I could see it in his face before he spoke, the recognition finally assembling itself from whatever partial picture he had been carrying. He stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Nate," he said. "Just that." "Hey, Derek." He looked like he was calculating something, the same expression he'd always had as a kid when he was deciding whether to say a true thing or a safe thing. "Dad's going to have a hard time with this," he said finally. "I know. I mean he's going to have a hard time with what it means, not with you. He talks about you, you know, more than you'd think." That surprised me enough that I didn't answer right away. "What does he say?" Derek looked uncomfortable in the way of someone who has said slightly more than they intended. "He says you had good instincts. Architectural instincts. He said it to a client once. This guy who was going on about the Arcline work on the Waterloo project, Dad told him that design sense ran in the family." He paused. He didn't tell him how. I held that information quietly for a moment. I did not know what to do with it yet. I filed it away in the part of my mind where I keep things that matter but need time. "I'm glad you're here," Derek said. I'm glad you exist. Still, I know that's a strange way to put it." "It's not strange," I said. The dinner with my father 2 nights later lasted 3 hours. My mother came, which I had not expected, and which changed the nature of the evening in ways I couldn't have anticipated. She cried twice, quietly, in the way she had always done things without calling attention to it, without requiring anyone to respond. My father did not cry. He sat across from me with the posture of a man who had decided to be honest, even when honesty was expensive, and he was honest. He told me that when I left, he had expected me to fail and come back, and that when I didn't fail, he hadn't known what to do with that information. He told me that the Waterloo project had come across his desk through a trade publication 3 years after I left, and that he had read about it and known it was exceptional work, and that he had not reached out because he was not sure I would want to hear from him, and also because reaching out would have required him to admit that he had been wrong, and that was something he was not, at that time, capable of. "I'm capable of it now," he said. "That's the only thing I can offer you." I told him I wasn't interested in a relationship built on the terms I had left with. I told him the company was not something I wanted to be part of. I told him Arcline was mine, and I intended to keep it exactly what it was, independent and structurally separate from anything Kellerman related. I told him that if he wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would have to be a personal one, not a professional one, and it would have to be built slowly, starting from something closer to honesty than either of us had managed when I was 26. He agreed to all of it. Whether he meant it, I won't know for some time. That's the nature of trust. It isn't established in a single dinner. It's established over years of small choices that either confirm it or reveal its absence. My mother held my hand when we said goodbye in the parking lot of the restaurant. She is not a woman who talks about emotions directly. It is possibly the most Kellerman thing about her. But she held my hand with both of hers, and looked at me in that way that means a thing too large to put in words, and I held her hands back, and that was enough for the night. I drove home along the waterfront, past the Meridian Tower lit up against the October sky, and I thought about what it means to build something, not a tower, something harder. The kind of structure you erect between people who have hurt each other and need, nevertheless, to share a world. The Meridian Tower is open to tenants now. Arcline won 2 additional awards for the design in the following calendar year. My father attended the ceremony for one of them, which I had not expected. He sat in the back of the room with Derek and said nothing that drew attention to himself. And when I accepted the award and thanked the Arcline team by name, I did not mention the Kellerman Group, and he did not expect me to. After, in the lobby, he shook my hand and said, "It's a good building, Nathan." And I said, "I know." And we both meant it. There are things I want to say now for anyone who finds themselves inside a version of this story, whether you are the one who left or the one who was left behind. When someone you love dismisses what you are capable of, the cruelest version of that dismissal isn't the anger or the argument. It's the certainty, the particular confidence with which some people decide what you are and refuse to revise the decision. That certainty isn't about you. It is about their need for the world to be a shape they can control. Understanding that doesn't make it hurt less in the moment, but it does change what you do about it. You stop trying to argue them out of their certainty. You go build the evidence instead. The years I spent building Arcline were not motivated by proving my father wrong, no matter how the story sounds from the outside. They were motivated by the fact that I had work to do that mattered and a way of doing it that felt true. The vindication, such as it is, was incidental. The work was the point. It always has to be the point. Because the alternative, spending your energy on the emotion of wanting to be recognized, will hollow you out long before it produces anything worth recognizing. That said, if the work happens to be your finest achievement, and it also happens to be standing in your father's atrium when he finally looks up and understands what he missed, there is nothing wrong with allowing yourself a quiet moment in the back of the lobby before you cross the floor. We are not required to pretend that justice, when it finally arrives, is not satisfying. We are only required to make sure we built something real enough to deserve it.